Hey, good. Welcome back from a good lunch I hope you all had. And this session is about public policy and how policies at the federal, state, municipal level can really bring about a more regenerative, successful economy. So let me give you a little context. I'm Richard Eidlin with the American Sustainable Business Council. We have John Powers. John will introduce himself in a moment, Halisi Vinson, and Michael Shuman. And we wanted to have a conversation about the transformative ability of public policy in, again, bringing about this type of economy that we've been chatting about here and discussing for the past few days. We want to look at the policy process. How do laws get enacted? The role of different stakeholder groups, the influence of money in politics and in shaping policy. And then want to look at three sort of big ideas here. One is democracy and how we ensure that our democracy maintains a well-functioning order and policy initiatives at the particularly state and local level that we can pursue to ensure our democracy functions so we can have a regenerative economy. Secondly is how capitalism itself can be reformed, altered by allowing more people to own a part of the economy through employee ownership and through co-ops and employee stock-owned plans in particular. And then finally, looking at development and what kinds of initiatives can be put in place and are being put in place at the local level in particular. And Michael's going to talk about that. So let me just ask each of the panelists to quickly introduce themselves. And again, the structure of this is we want to have a conversation among the four of us, and then we want to get you involved as soon as possible. So John, if you just say a few words about yourself.
I'm John Powers. I'm the founder and past president of the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado. The Alliance was formed in order to create solutions from bringing people into partnership. And I think that's consistent with what this conference is about. We have a building in Denver that has nearly 50 groups, all with some mission that involves sustainability. Intentionally to be all nonprofit, but we have a few very like-minded for-profits.
Thank you, John. Good. Halisi.
Okay. My name is Halisi Vinson. I am the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. And we believe that employee ownership is a way to get more folks involved in the economy as capitalists, as entrepreneurs. We believe that employee ownership is a means to lessen the income and wealth gap, that it is not extractive, and that it is a way to stave off the negative effects of gentrification. And so how many folks know what employee ownership is? Oh, good. Then I don't have to explain. Wonderful.
I'm Michael Shuman, and you heard from me yesterday. I have three unfortunate monikers. I'm a lawyer, I'm an economist, and I live in Washington, D.C. So hate me if you will. Yesterday we talked about, I talked about local investment as an important tool for bringing about all the kinds of transformation in the economy we're looking for. One of the reasons I think I'm sitting on this panel is to talk about what for me was an unusual experience, because I've spent my lifetime supporting losing causes. Most of us have probably had this experience. But in the last few years, I've been supporting winning ones around securities reform in both the national level and in 35 states. So I want to share some of that experience.
Thank you, Michael, and Halisi and John. So just a little bit more context. You know, we, at our organization, the American Sustainable Business Council, we talk about the market being smart, but it's not perfect. And consequently, we need rules and we need policies to move progressive ideas forward. And we are a national group of businesses like New Belgium Brewing, like Ben & Jerry's, Etsy, Eileen Fisher, Dansko, B-Lab is a member, and we basically work under the proposition that it's better to be at the table than on the menu, and that the organizations and institutional powers that have been shaping our economy for a long time have been entrenched corporate interests that have dumped millions and millions of dollars into our political system and have reaped tremendous rewards for a very narrow set of stakeholders or shareholders. So when we started ASBC in 2009, our premise was that progressive triple bottom line, sustainably oriented companies needed a voice in the policymaking process on a wide range of issues, everything from campaign finance to tax reform to sustainable economic development to healthcare to agriculture to climate, chemical reform, all types of policies. And so that's what we're focused on. And we're fortunate to work at primarily the federal and state level, but also work with organizations across the country, particularly that are businesses focused on making the case for a new economy, an economy that puts wealth in the hands of a broader set of the public. And we make that case from the business perspective. So I want to turn to John for a moment. And, you know, we were certainly a theme that we're hearing a lot about at present is that our democracy is really fundamentally under threat, be it Russiagate, be it voter suppression, be it Citizens United. There are a tremendous number of initiatives underway that are really clouding the future of our democracy. And there are a number of methods to address that. And John's working on a number of those around the country on ensuring that the democratic system we live in functions, that it functions for business, so that the rule of law is maintained, and that we have a participatory system that retains its integrity. So John wanted to give us a sense of some of the work he's doing and ways you can participate, and particularly legislative initiatives that are happening across the country. John.
Thank you, and I want to thank the working group I've been part of because we developed a challenge statement, so I'm going to challenge you all with our challenge statement. The greatest threat to the environment, women's rights, immigration, social justice, healthcare, education, poverty, and in fact our planetary life support systems is preserving democracy in the United States. The idea that two heads are better than one, democratic, the whole idea of a democratic society, and the disproportionate impact that the United States has globally. If we don't preserve democracy in this country, which is under threat, as I would say, more profoundly than since the Civil War, the issues that we care about broadly, if we don't pay attention to politics, we are not going to succeed nearly to the extent that we need to, given the size of the challenges that we face. So from this morning, we were advised not to portray a doom and gloom scenario, right? But to paint the picture of hope and a brighter future. So one of the things that I have as an image is the 1.5 million women march on the mall in Washington, D.C., right? That's great. That's a point in time. What are we going to do with that as a representation of the interest of people to get involved? People want to know what can they do. And what I'm working on right now in my own little bubble, and I would certainly like to expand it, but I was so troubled by myself knowing what to do and thinking about it and taking some time to figure out what other people can do, is that I started to compile a list of steps from simple to hard, no cost, easy to do. Example, each of us with an organization could post on our websites a link to a way to register to vote. You can take somebody else's link. All you have to do is put it on your website. For those in the foundation world, that you would ask every nonprofit that is applying for funding, what is your plan on engaging in democracy? What are you going to do to protect it? That's simple. The most difficult would be, let's change the US Constitution and abolish the Electoral College. Okay? Now yeah, but that's great, but I'm into getting things done. So the counterpoint to trying to change the federal constitution is we can do this state by state. There's a thing called the Compact on the States. Steve Fenberg, the representative from the senator from the Boulder area, introduced a bill that would bind the electoral college votes from the state of Colorado to be consistent with the national electoral popular vote. And that can happen state by state. So there are actions we can take. But I'm just trying to weave in a couple thoughts, and I apologize for reading them, but with the online petitions, I think that they serve a useful purpose to notify people of things that are coming at them. But what I'm very concerned about is they think that by signing the petition, they're doing something meaningful. I think these petitions are useless, other than for information. They provide information. What I'm concerned about is someone having signed a petition thinks they've done something useful. And they haven't. We've got to get engaged on a much deeper, more meaningful level. And the challenge I'll also throw out is that the greatest threat to democracy is thinking that somebody else is going to take care of it. So everybody in this room needs to figure out what you're going to do, and we have to develop messages that are going to inspire other people to take actions. Because the same thing that I'm sick of getting these petitions, if I get one more funding request from a Democratic Party, federal, state, or candidate, that is painting the doom and gloom picture, saying these horrible things are headed our way. Well, geez, that's news. You guys did a horrible job in the last elections. You're going to have to come up with a product that you can sell me with some vision, some ideas of what people can do, what we need to do that inspire people to take action. That, I would buy their product. At this point, no sale.
John, thank you. We're going to return to that theme. So in this, earlier today, there were a number of comments made about telling stories and crafting myths and having clear messages, and also finding ways to respond to the increasing polarization in our political system. So one of the things that is interesting to think about is, where are there cross-cutting issues? Where are there common values? And unfortunately, in electoral reform efforts, it really has become a partisan issue in many ways. There are efforts to bridge the gap. There's a group called the Bridge Alliance that is doing that work, and that's really important. But another area where there is some opportunity for common ground is on this broader theme of economic democracy or worker ownership. And so Halisi Vinson is the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. Her organization and our organization have been working together, particularly in Colorado, where a bill recently passed that Halisi will tell us about, and the governor will sign tomorrow. And also in Washington, D.C. So just a quick story. So this idea of worker ownership has appealed to Republicans, like Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, and has appealed to Bernie Sanders. They're far apart on the political spectrum, but what's compelling is it creates an opportunity for jobs and maintaining a vital economy. So Halisi, tell us a bit about the work you're doing and what are some lessons to be learned from how the bill got passed here in Colorado and how that might be replicated in other states.
So one thing that I wanted to add, just based upon the comments that were made before, is that another threat to our democracy and the lack of civic engagement is economics. People who are busy trying to make ends meet do not participate in their civic duty. And so employee ownership is one way that we can rise folks up and make sure that they're not just surviving but thriving, and then able to do that homework to participate in the system, so that some of these, the bifurcation of our nation does not happen. When people have education, when people have information, then they don't go for the okie doke. And so what we were able to do here in Colorado, it was a freshman actually that helped get this bill passed, and he's a Democrat. And he came to me and said, Halisi, I said that I was going to listen to the community on what needed to be done. And so I'm coming to you asking for some ideas. And of course, I pitched employee ownership. And so the bill is 1214, and it is encouraging employee ownership of existing small businesses. And what it calls for is the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, OEDIT, will integrate employee ownership into its menu of educational items. And so when businesses come to their small business development centers and ask for advice, exit strategies, and succession planning, or just how to grow their business, they will be educating them on employee ownership. They're going to engage a nonprofit, probably us, to actually go around and educate their folks at their small business development centers. The other piece to that is a revolving loan fund for small businesses. And when I say small, I mean small, like 5 million in sales and under. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't a big business giveaway. You know, we didn't want it to be framed that way. Now, the things that I learned, it was definitely a learning process. First of all, if you pitch an idea and you are an expert in that subject matter, expect to be very, very involved in the process here in Colorado. We have, they only serve for half of the year, and they only get paid.
The legislature serves.
The
right?
legislators only serve for half a year, and they only get paid about $40,000 a year, or a little bit under. And their aides only get like $15 an hour. So they don't have help, and they're depending upon lobbyists, unfortunately, and people like us to help them get these things done. So this became part of my job, interestingly enough. Now, the other thing that was disheartening is employee ownership as a concept was really brought to the forefront by Ronald Reagan in a speech that he gave. And it is in the Republican Party platform. A Democrat introduced this on the House floor, and so it passed along party lines in the House. And even though I sent them copies of their platform highlighting 2016, this is the latest, and here it is, you know, you guys support this, and they still did not vote yes. And it seems to me that some of that has to do with who introduces it, and I hate to say that because it sounds so cynical. But there's nothing else that can be that I can derive for the reasons that they gave for not supporting it. Now in the Senate, this freshman was so smart in getting stakeholders to the table. He got a Republican and the chair of the business committee to support it and to be the person who introduced it on the Senate floor. And so consequently, it passed with bipartisan support in the Senate. Go figure. And so tomorrow, the governor will sign it, and I will definitely be photobombing that picture. We got to make sure, yeah, definitely. And then afterwards, we're going to have a meeting about this revolving loan fund. And, you know, and so these things can be done, and it's a little baby steps, baby steps. It's not as strong as we wanted it to be, but we're going to come back next year and make it stronger.
Good. So just a few lessons to remember from that experience, which I think is translatable to the entire country. Most legislatures operate like Colorado. There are a few around the country, New York, Massachusetts, California, that are full-time and year-round, and they have staffs, extensive staffs, and a lot of money. In most states across the country, the staff is limited, and as Halisi noted, the legislators really rely on people who are there to advise them. You know, it's in some ways a democratic system, but it also means that if you're not at the table, you know, you're going to show up on the menu. And that the value in participating as an expert. So Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center became an expert. It brought people in. It brought New Belgium Brewing. It brought other companies who were employee stock owned or who were co-ops to become the experts. That carried tremendous weight in influencing the outcome. So it's a good lesson to learn. Moving on, Michael, you have done a lot of work in the area of economic gardening and looking at discrete initiatives that can be promoted at the state and particularly the municipal level and sometimes county. And so my question for you is, when you think about, in a sense, how the system is rigged, we don't account for externalities, we have tremendous subsidies being paid for particularly development, large box stores coming into communities. What are some policies that you're finding work in communities across the country to foster a more democratic economy? What lessons are you seeing working in the country?
Well, I think that the best policies are ones that cost nothing. And it kind of makes sense. And one easy win for communities is to stop subsidizing the attraction of outside business. That'll save state and local governments something north of $80 billion a year. And it is totally counterproductive for economic development. Now, I would add to that if you can't, or your economic developers can't quite get themselves past the addiction on giving money to outside business, here's one possible cure, which is subject your money-giving process to a bidding, RFP, and say, we desperately want to give money for jobs, but we're going to allow all businesses, local and non-local, to bid for it. And basically say how many jobs of a certain quality you're going to provide at a certain cost, and local businesses will then win almost all the time. So either way, you get to the same end. Another example of a...
And are there cities you can point to that are pursuing
Well,
that?
there are cities that have basically unilaterally disarmed because they understand that this is a wasteful expenditure of money. There haven't been cities that have put this open to bidding yet, but that's only if you can't overcome your addiction. I mean, that's your halfway house. So another example of a free policy is moving your banking from, say, Bankasur of America into a local bank or credit union. Usually, the terms for municipal banking will be identical across banks, but the difference is that when the money is put in the local banking institution, it then recycles in the community. And two recent examples of this radical policy are in the home of Barry Goldwater in Arizona, one in Phoenix and one in Tucson, and they have both begun to systematically move all of their banking into local banks and credit unions. A last thing I would say, and we talked about this in our local economy group yesterday, every city should just put up in its website a list of every business or project in the community seeking funds, so that people who are interested in local investment can immediately see, here's like a worker ownership project. Here is a co-op looking for money. Here is a local business with a local stock issue. And at the same time, yesterday we talked briefly about promoting self-directed IRAs and solo 401ks so you could take tax-deferred money and move that into these businesses. Well, the city should facilitate that. In my view, this is like a couple of $1,000s of website expense by a city to generate millions of dollars of local investment.
Okay, good. Good. Michael, thank you. So John, coming back to this meta theme of democracy and ensuring our system continues to function, can you point to a few examples that you think at the state level in particular that are really important and that will preserve voting rights, expand voting rights, and you mentioned a few up front, but you want to point us to some specific examples, if you would?
Yes, and I'll also offer anybody, I'll tell you my email address here slowly in a second, but I'm working on this. It's a dynamic document, and I'm willing to share it with people, and I'd certainly invite ways to grow it to make it more meaningful. So I'll touch on a few of the ideas that are in it. Again, I've tried to sequence this on something we can do this afternoon and something that may exceed our lifetimes. So voter registration, there's so many opportunities, whether it's automatic voter registration, right? It's an opt-out system rather than an opt-in system. you know, there's many ways to get at that. That would be, in a certain sense, the panacea, but you can do that when you register for college. You're automatically registered to vote or whatever, or it comes up, or your DMV, et cetera. Then getting out the vote. Part of the challenge, and I admire other folks who are thinking the long term. I'm figuring 2018, if we got to see the pendulum swing back. So we need to do some things immediately, and we need to do things long term, like civic engagement, civic education, informing and educating voters so that they know what they're voting on. But some of the things that I'm thinking about are also protecting voting rights. And I think you'll see attacks on that all over the place. And the organization that I've come across is called the Brennan Center. And the Brennan Center is doing statistical data gathering. And we've all heard about the 3 million illegal votes. Now understand that every Secretary of State, that means that they have failed at their job, right? And a lot of them are Republican. The point is, where are you going to say, oh, was it your state? Was it your state? Was it on your watch? So there are ways to generate forces to protect that have a vested interest who are part of the process. So we need to do two things. We need to gather data on actually the number of illegal votes that are out there. And I think in Colorado, they said that the Secretary of State said something under 20. And how does that translate state by state into 3 million? So the point is, how many people vote illegally versus the effort to disenfranchise people? So we have to step up, and there are ways to engage in the political process to protect it. Combating voter suppression, we need to develop a media plan so that people know that the facts of how this is, get the spokespeople like the Secretaries of State. But on a particular level, and I'll close for the moment, what can we do at the state level that will have a national impact? Now, I mentioned the state compact on binding your electoral college to vote with the popular vote. But there are a number of, I don't know if you've seen the bill in South Dakota, that it's okay to run over a protester as long as you do it by accident. Yeah. You have no idea of what we're up against. And I'm calling this scrum politics. This is not something where you sit on the sideline. We have to get out there and get in the scrum. A same-day voter registration, automatic voting registration. There's a bill that was being introduced in Colorado to require all presidential and vice presidential candidates to be listed on the Colorado ballot have to release their tax returns. I can't do that nationally, but you can do it state by state. It was introduced this year. It lost on party line vote in the Colorado Senate. And I'm going to say something I hope you can read between the lines. We have an 18-17 majority in the Colorado Senate. We have a 2018 election. Okay? This is not spectator sports. This is roll up your sleeves. Nullify the Electoral College. Another one in California for gerrymandering, redistricting, non-competitive elections. They have a bill that was introduced to make your districting done by independent, nonpartisan commissions, right? So we can support that. We can support that state by state. And the last thing, how many of you ever heard of a thing called ALEC? Okay, American Legislative Exchange Council, which takes state elected representatives and takes them to think tank training. And that's why in 1 year, in 35 states, was introduced a bill called Takings. For those of you who don't, anyway, it's an anti-regulatory bill, popped up in 35 states at the same time because of ALEC. There's now a group called SIX, the State Innovation Exchange, and it's a counterpart on the other side. My point is, it's a summation of doing these state actions, and we now have a vehicle, there may be others, to roll this up to have it have a national impact. This is not a time to be a spectator. And I'm happy to, my email is jpowers, Jpowers 11, jpowers11. And I'm happy to share this document so that people can take short-term, immediate, 2018 focused efforts to paint a positive picture of what we can accomplish with this opportunity, rather than the doom and gloom of the sky's falling and we have to react to not being hit by a piece of the sky. Oh, it's jpowers11@earthlink.net. Yeah. Earthlink, I don't trust people monitoring my email, and I think Earthlink's less likely.
Good.
I'm sorry?
Open primaries.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So just another question for Halisi and then for Michael, and then we'll open it up here. So, Halisi, when you think about expanding ownership opportunities, and that as a means to address two big challenges, at least two. One is the retirement crisis that we face in this economy, where far too few people have assets saved to support themselves. And there used to be three legs of the stool, right? Personal savings, Social Security, and pensions. Most people don't have a pension. Right. Social Security system, unclear what will happen to that in the next decade. And if people aren't saving enough, then they're in trouble. The other big threat that is looming is succession planning, a succession crisis, where baby boomers, probably a lot of us in this audience, are looking to exit companies we've started, may not be able to find some outside party to buy our company. So how about selling it to the employees? So as you've thought about worker ownership as kind of a structural reform of our economic system, what have been some of the objections you've heard from the skeptics, and what have been maybe some of the misunderstandings that you've had to respond to?
The objection is United Airlines, Enron. But we can.
So someone has gamed the system.
Right. Well, United didn't game the system, but Enron did. It worked, but then a VC came in and dismantled all of the committees that encourage employee engagement, and morale went down, and customer service went down, and next thing you know, they're filing for chapter whatever they filed. Mm-hmm. So an interesting story, but I just want to say something. 2017, there is an election as well. And I want us to get out of the habit of only thinking in even number years. In 2017, I don't know what's happening out here in Boulder County, but in most counties, there's school board and there's city council and there's initiatives. And those are the folks who are going to run Washington tomorrow. So we have to make sure that we are, building our bench, whatever that bench looks like for you, in every single election. And in Denver, we have municipal elections in the spring. So every time we get a ballot, this is the most educated audience that I've ever spoken to. I feel like you guys could be up here, actually. So we have two issues that are happening. One is that we know that employees of ESOPs retire with 2.5 times more money in their retirement accounts. And so the sexiest story that I know, and some of you might have heard of this, is Winco Grocers out of the Northwest. They have cashiers at Winco Grocers that will retire with 7 figures in their retirement account. Yeah.
And they're the nicest grocers you'll ever meet, right? They're really happy.
I'd be happy because I don't have 7 figures. I should have been a doctor. No, I should have been a cashier at Winco.
Miss that opportunity.
Absolutely. And so, if you think about that, that is going to change the trajectory of their family, if handled properly, forever. Grandkids will now not be in debt with student loans and all of that stuff. So you've got that, and you're talking about the pillars, right? And so that's one thing. One thing that we know is that employee owners retire with more money. And the other thing that's happening is what they call kind of the silver tsunami. And I don't look at it as a tsunami because it's not something that's going to happen and then go away. It's actually going to continue on. So what we know is that baby boomers control the majority of small business assets. As a matter of fact, they've got about $10 trillion worth of assets that will be for sale over the next 7 to 11 years. And we don't have enough of us Gen Xers to buy these companies. And so statistics show that about 51% of these companies will simply close because they don't have buyers. 51%. And so in Denver proper, I think that equals something like $426 million worth of payroll. I think that's the number that I came up with. And I don't know, but could get the numbers for out here. So this could actually be devastating. One, because it comes in a compressed period of time, and two, because the majority of people work for small businesses in the state of Colorado. I think 67% of folks work for small businesses in the state of Colorado. The second piece to that is if you look at the next two generations, the majority of folks who own those small businesses are people of color, which don't have access to capital. So again, if we do not systemically change our system and make sure that people of color have that access to capital and can do the transaction and make sure that those businesses stay in the community, serving the community that they've been serving for the last 30 years, then we're going to have another tsunami, and it's just going to continue on.
Okay, thank you. Michael, to pick up on that theme of local economic development, because what Halisi was suggesting was, as the families move themselves up an economic run, the whole community benefits, right? So could you give us a few more examples of policies that are working at the municipal level that are supporting small businesses, that are supporting micro businesses, and really addressing the sort of commoditization of our economy, where one chain after another buys up assets in a community, and that that has a certain adverse impact on diversity, on inclusion in an economy, and opportunity.
Yeah, so in the spirit of good news, I will say that the story of small business being devastated by large business is a myth. In point of fact, over the last generation, small businesses have done extremely well vis-a-vis larger businesses, despite the inattention and counterproductive policies that come from economic development. Another thing, too, is that we have really good statistics on the profitability of smaller businesses. From our neighbor to the north, Canada, turns out that the most profitable businesses have 10 to 20 employees. The least profitable businesses are those traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, where Canadians are putting all their money. So that's kind of what's happening in the United States right now. Now, the problem is that retail, which you mentioned, is one exception. In retail, small businesses have taken a tremendous shellacking from big boxes, and we tend to think that retail is a huge part of our economy because that's where we encounter things. But in point of fact, it's about 7 or 8% of the economy. And so take the retail piece out of your mind and think about all of the other ways in which smaller businesses are competing successfully. But that said, there's a bunch of policies, I think, that can move this along. One policy, just simply pay attention to home businesses. Home-based businesses technically only involve about 20 or 30 million Americans, but in fact, it probably involves over 100 million Americans. By a show of hands here, how many people are a home-based business? Okay, so that gives you a sense, I think, of what's true nationally. Home-based businesses have been under siege by municipal governments for a century. They try to pull things out of the house into other commercial or industrial districts. They try to kill you with licensing fees. They try to over-regulate you. And I think that communities that have paid more attention to small businesses, even issues like parking. I mean, in Washington, D.C., the meter maids declare war on home-based businesses. I have a customer outside my house, tickets. I have someone working for me, tickets. And there's no exemption in the parking that allows home-based businesses to operate. I mean, it's really simple stuff like that that I think is important. Another example, zoning policy. Our zoning ideas are at least 100 years out of date because our zoning ideas were to say, put residential over here and commercial over here and schools there and smokestacks there and farming back there. And the result is everyone is driving around all the time. And we're underutilizing things. So some districts are busy at night, some are busy during the day. It's very inefficient. And this bad land use pattern is rife in Colorado. So I think overhauling our zoning and making many more mixed uses, dense uses possible, but also thinking in terms of equity. Richard Florida just wrote a really good new book trying to talk about creative cities, but through a lens of equity. And he talks about Henry George taxation ideas. So Henry George was an economist in the 19th century who basically said, okay, property taxes can be more progressive, but we need to think in terms of separating out the tax on the land, which makes sense, from the tax on the improvements that doesn't make sense. So if you tax the land and someone just holds the property for speculation, they lose money. So Henry George tax, which is in effect in a couple of jurisdictions in Pennsylvania and in a bunch of jurisdictions around the world, really is great for reducing speculation. But if I look at Washington, D.C., we have a metro system, and the metro system has built these little stations around Washington, D.C., and the real estate values have skyrocketed in all of those areas. And who has gained from that? The developers. What would have been smarter is employing Henry George ideas and taxing all that gain away to pay for the metro system, which is now nearly bankrupt. So that kind of thinking, I think, needs to imbue how we move development along.
Great, good. Thank you, Michael. So before we open it up here, I just wanted to give one other example. And when Kim was speaking about benefit corporations, I'm not sure she mentioned that this came about both on a market-driven initiative, so it was forward-thinking businesses who wanted to improve their credibility, improve their performance, improve their operations, and so they developed a certification program. But the other element she mentioned was that there's a legal codification to become a benefit corporation. And so in 33 states now, I think, is that the right number? 33 states across the country, including Colorado, legislation was enacted to enable companies to rewrite their charter. So I just give that as an example of how important public policy is. And that idea was propelled by business leaders in particular who wanted that option, just like worker ownership. So the lesson, again, to be learned is all of us here can play a huge role in shaping policy. So let me open it up, see what questions you have. Yeah, right here. And here comes a microphone behind you. Oh, okay. Okay.
So I'll explain a little bit of my understanding of something and then an idea that I think someone named Healy mentioned yesterday. So my understanding is that the private sector has an economy. We tax the private sector to pay for government. So that's sort of my understanding. And the policy, and so with technological unemployment coming our way with robots and computers eliminating a lot of private sector jobs and some government sector jobs, we're going to see this huge technological unemployment. What kinds of policy can government instill to maintain the ratio of public to private sector economy, and do we have to maintain that ratio? And the example I was thinking of yesterday is Boulder implementing solar energy, creating solar energy businesses that are all private sector to meet a policy need. And so is this going to be an important role of government, maintaining the private sector proportion of the economy, or is that something we need to rethink?
So two thoughts. One, many of you won't agree with me on this, but I saw lots of predictions in the early 1960s about technology taking over all jobs, and it didn't happen. And I'm very skeptical of these arguments. But to the extent that they might be true, shifting our taxes from labor to capital and technology and inputs to production would be a very smart idea. And this is where a carbon tax, which Donna Morton referred to very briefly yesterday, is a very smart idea. Because in addition to taxing things we don't want, which is the burning of carbon-oriented fossil fuels, we are removing taxes from wages and income and thereby making labor relatively cheaper and making it more enticing for businesses to use more labor.
Yeah, and I would just 2 points I'd add. With the carbon tax, there's a lot of good news happening at the state level. There are bills being introduced and actively discussed in a number of Northeast states and also in Washington State, and California is now considering a bill. So that is a way to tax an externality and generate tremendous amount of income. And what you do with that revenue, that's another conversation. But the other thing I would mention to your point is this idea of the future of work and how to create meaningful work if, in fact, autonomous vehicles become, they become as important as they may be. I've been really struck by conversations that we have in Washington, D.C. with folks on Capitol Hill. They have no idea what to do. It's shocking. And I had a conversation last week with some folks in the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and they're holding a conference in October to look at the future of work. One of the things they are considering is the idea of portable benefits, so that you really can move your benefits from job to job. They're looking at a guaranteed, what's it called, Michael? Yes, thank you. They're looking at that idea, and then they're also actively talking about higher capital gains tax, tax on capital, transactions tax, which the Tobin tax has been talked about for years now. Obviously, tremendous pushback in a Republican Congress, but these are some, viable solutions that we have to consider. John, you want to add to that?
Quick thought. How many people, I'm going to ask this question in the converse. How many people have been into your state legislature? How many people have not been into your state legislature? Okay, we're talking about good ideas, and it isn't the other guy who's going to do it. Okay? If you haven't been there, get there. Because you have to put your support behind good ideas. They are not going to happen by themselves, and even if you support them conceptually, you have to do it physically. The Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, I don't know if you know, the B Corp legislation has to be passed state by state. We started with it. We saw a need for it, and by the third year, New Belgium was on board, ASPC was on board, but somebody got an idea, and you get to know your legislators, and you go take action.
Yeah, so right here, please.
Gil Friend, thank you for this. There are a lot of good policy ideas here, but these all come down to political power. And part of that is going to the legislature, and part of it is talking about odd-year elections for local government. But I would ask the question of the room, how many people here have stood for elective office? How many people here have ever stood for elective office or ever served in elective office? So if you look at the Powell Memorandum Strategy, which we've been talking a lot about here, that included a concerted effort to field candidates at every level from dog catcher to school board on up and build a farm team system for the Congress that we have today. And to the extent that we don't recognize that part of the game, we don't get to have legislators that we can lobby in Congresses that we can control. So how does that fit into the movement building that we're talking about here?
I just wanted to add one thing to what you said. I just talked to a Boulder City Council person earlier today, and she gets paid $15,000 a year to do what she does. So it's become a rich person's hobby. And so one of the first things that we need to do is to pay folks a wage that makes it doable. Otherwise, we only get a certain amount of people doing it.
I would add, Gil, that there are an unprecedented number of mobilization efforts underway, candidate training programs, that I'm aware of, particularly focused on millennials, getting young people to run for office. So I think that's a really important trend, and I think we'll see a lot more of it in 2018. Yes. And I think, Jeff, is this our last question? It is. Okay.
Okay, then it better be good. On the business team, we talked a lot about lobbyists and the role that they play in decision-making in our country. Right. I'd love to get some thoughts as to, what we could be doing differently.
Okay, so let me, one of the discoveries that the American Sustainable Business Council had when we started in 2009 was there was a narrative that when the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said something, supposedly it was speaking for business, right? That was it. And that's how the media generally reported. National Association of Manufacturers, U.S. Chamber of Commerce said something, healthcare, climate, that was it. Well, we know that's not true. So we are lobbyists. We are the good lobbyists. But we are, in our view, we're registered as a 501c3 and C4, and we take New Belgium Brewing or Dansko or Eileen Fisher or Patagonia or any of our members, small and large companies, we are lobbying. So, that's, until we can have a radical wholesale different system, we have to participate. We don't have the capital they do. We don't have the resources. But I think part of the change needs to be, at least from the business perspective, is that there's high road business and there's the low road. Donald Trump is representing the low road. The folks in his administration have that point of view, and that's what we can see, right? So just last quick story about business. When we worked with Secretary Tom Perez of the Department of Labor a few years ago, who's a real champion of worker rights, he didn't know anything about business. And if he was sitting here, he'd shake his head, yes. So we introduced to him this concept of high road responsible companies, active, engaged in their communities. He picked that up, and then we heard from the White House them talking about business. So we made a distinction, and the Democratic Party, I think, could do a much better job of engaging with business and not ceding the playing field to, not to be partisan, but not ceding the playing field to Republicans who purport to represent business.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, John.